So should you play Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy in 2025? I remember wanting to play this game when it first came out and I just never got round to it, like a lot of games. And now it's been almost 4 whole years, which is crazy to think about. I thought it was way closer than that. So I believe it's now a great time to check it out finally, and if you don't know how the game does play out, like I did, I wasn't too familiar what it was about beforehand, and I sort of thought it was a multiplayer, like, first-person shooter game, but it's actually a fairly story-driven game and a third-person shooter, where you play and you control the character of Star-Lord or Peter Quill. I'd also like to mention that I haven't seen any of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Of course, I do know a little about the characters just from other stuff, but that was basically my first impression of the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, which I don't think is a terrible thing. Now, you can't actually switch between characters, you do stay as Star-Lord for the entirety, which I think it is way better having it this way. I think being able to play as everyone could be a bit overwhelming, I guess, and would sort of feel like a whole different game entirely. Instead, you have Star-Lord's main abilities and his strong areas, and then there's areas where he would usually be stuck or quite limited, and that's where the side characters come into play and can help you out. And that's if you command them to perform certain actions that you're not capable of doing. And of course, these side characters go by Gamora, Rocket, Groot and Drax, each one having their own unique abilities, which I'll get into. And just looking into the combat, as you play, after gaining enough momentum, you're able to perform a call to action attack on heavier enemies that deal a ton of damage. And then there's certain abilities that will include all the characters as a team huddle, where it will go into a cutscene and Star-Lord does give off this motivational speech, I suppose, to everyone, where you can choose between 2 different ones. The better one giving the other Guardians better boosts, so you do have to listen out a bit and sort of think about what is the best to give an advantage to everyone, and not just Star-Lord. Now, if we go through the Guardians' gameplay styles quickly and their abilities, which can be unlocked through, of course, ability points and used as combos if you do unlock them. So if we look at Gamora, she'll use her sword to deal different strikes on enemies, depending on how upgraded she is. So it will go through Deadly Strike, which is the standard heavy damage she can deal, and then Shadow Strike will allow her to dash between enemies and striking each one, and then Stagger Wave will strike a single enemy, followed by a wave of energy to stagger all the enemies behind them, and lastly Executioner will strike a single enemy but then multiple times to deal a huge amount of damage. So that might have sounded all like the same thing I just said, and they're fairly similar, but basically she just becomes stronger the more you play. She's also useful in breaking through blocked areas with her sword, so like vines for example. And then there's Rocket, who has a cluster flak bomb which lets off a massive blast that damages a target and the surrounding enemies. And then there's Gravistack Grenade, I believe, which groups up enemies into one target for a big attack. And then the Glowing Pains Grenade will just stagger and slow enemies down. And then Fire Barrel Barrage is just a giant turret basically, full of missiles and guns to spray down on enemies. He's also useful in getting into small and tight enclosed spaces. And then Groot has Entangle to grapple multiple enemies and trap them down. And then Uproot will shoot roots from the ground to damage and launch enemies into the air. Mammoth Grab will grapple a large enemy to then stagger them. And then lastly, the Gift of the Flora will revive allies and reset their cooldowns, including you. And then he can also create bridges between 2 spots to get across certain areas. And then of course there's Star-Lord, who you play as, which involves Vantage Point, and that uses his jet boost to fly up into the air and shoot from above. And then Fan the Hammer is rapid fire shots to deal heavy damage, which does spread across multiple enemies. And then Eye of the Hurricane will launch you into the air and then rain down grenades below you. And then lastly, it's a defense shield which will make you fully resistant for a short while. And he sort of does have a lot of stuff compared to the other characters because that's who you are playing as. And overall, I think the abilities do really balance out the gameplay, I think, because even though you're only playing as Star-Lord, it never really feels like you're missing out on the others. You do still get to be tactical with them without being forced to switch between everyone at once. I find it better that way, and it's somewhat different. And as for the story itself, I was fairly surprised by how much it had to offer really. I sort of went into it expecting more of a light-hearted, jokey sort of story like Borderlands, I guess. Which I guess it still has, of course, but it's still a bit deeper than that. So without, spoiling too much, it kind of explores their backstories in terms of the characters and their traumas they've been through, while still keeping that humour and the comic book vibe, I guess, that you'd expect from the movies. So it starts off with them in debt and they're trying to sort of capture a rare creature to pay off the fine, but of course it isn't as straightforward as that, and they end up unraveling more threats, basically. And the game does a pretty good job at sort of showing the character development of them all. Like, not all of them, get along at the start and you'll see them arguing, but then they become closer and more friendly as a team towards the end as you progress through. The story also relies on dialogue options that can affect how it plays out to a degree, and definitely the relationships between the two characters. So as an example, if you choose to defend or are more friendly to a certain character, then it will pop up on the screen about how they feel about it. And as I mentioned, it doesn't flip the entire narrative, but it does make for a bit of responsibility, I guess. And it does emphasize that team leading feature, which we get in the gameplay as well, not just playing as one character. So yeah, if you're like me or just anyone and you're wanting to play this game and maybe before you wanted to get it when it first came out and never got around to it like me, then I'd say it's definitely worth checking out in 2025. Like, the gameplay and the visuals, they don't feel old, they're still holding up now, so I don't know why you wouldn't play it. It's not like it's a multiplayer game or a game that has constant updates and is always evolving. A lot of the time with story games, it usually is the case where they are still holding up now. And even though it's been 4 years, which sounds like a lot, but then that was 2021, so all the next gen consoles, they were already out at that time, so it's nothing crazy. I guess it's just a fun game to play, and it's not, the longest game ever, but in terms of the gameplay and the combat, that's probably the best part of it in my opinion. And then the story's just on the side, and that is fairly solid. I mean, there's nothing to write home about, but there's nothing to hate on it really. I think the best part about that is the characters themselves. They're all they all offer something, and you do sort of grow to them, I suppose. And even if you're not a big fan of the franchise or haven't seen any of the films, then it's still worth checking out as a standalone experience. So if you did enjoy this video, then let me know by tapping that like button down below. And if you enjoy single player and also multiplayer games as well, then that's what this channel does focus on. I have multiple playlists on a selection of games, so you can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to. And if you want to support me any further, then you can become a member at either level 1 or 2 to gain access to various perks. And thank you all for the support and watching until the very end. And that was Guardians of the Galaxy in 2025, and bye bye.